Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Wilder Ride, where we are getting wilder by the minute, a podcast that celebrates the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. And in season 2, we are breaking down the movie Blazing Saddles 1, Reach for It, Mr. Minute at a time. I'm your host, Alan Sanders, and unfortunately, our co-host here, Walt Murray, had to take leave today. Normally on a hump day, we celebrate Igor and his hump being its hump day. But apparently the hump shifted on us, and Walt had to take him to go find Dr. Frankenstein and see if, being a rather gifted surgeon, to see what might get done about that. But we are here with a very special guest. Returning from yesterday, we have Chris Frain with the podcast Open the Podcast Doors, Hal. Welcome back, Chris.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Awesome to have you here, and a fan of the movie Blazing Saddles. It's always better to have guests that really love the material.
Absolutely. I can't imagine going on a podcast and, we did an experimental podcast where we had never seen the film before.
Oh, you were part of Dave Made a Maze as well, or Dave Made a Minute.
Yes, I was, or we were.
Walt and I had a blast doing that.
It pretty much was a deconstruction of our genre that only has existed for since Star Wars Minute, so maybe 5 years, and we're already sort of playing with the format, how it works and how it fits together, and of course we're still on our first podcast. This 2001 podcast we're doing is the first one that I've ever done, so I'm already being thrown into this postmodern podcast experiment that was Dave Made a Minute. Go check that out, everyone. It's definitely, it's an interesting listen, and it is some really entertaining source material.
What I loved about the whole concept is Robert Black, a professor of communication out in California, kind of knew about this movie.
And Evil Genius.
He was aware of this movie. It was an indie flick that he had seen, and he had apparently come across some of the people involved with it and thought that he could pull them in. And so he thought it'd be interesting as an experiment to see what would happen if you take Movies by Minutes podcasters, all of us that are used to diving into the minutia of a film 1 minute at a time, and give them a movie that none of us has seen, and give us random minutes, not even connected, just random minutes, and try to figure out what's going on. It actually was surprising how many Movies by Minutes folks could at least get within a fair degree of accuracy of predicting what was happening.
Yeah, we figured out the premise. Luckily, we had some crucial minutes towards the beginning, and then we had some minutes maybe around the 60-minute mark where it seemed like it was maybe the height or the depth rather of Act 2, and so we at least knew the dimensions of the conflict that was happening. Beyond that, I'm not sure how it resolved.
And it's a movie I have yet to see. It wrapped up last season or last year, and I know Walt rented and watched it and said it was really, really good. I loved the set design. I love the production design behind this independent little flick about being caught in a cardboard box world. It was a lot of fun, and I asked Robert if he would do an experiment like that again, and he said the problem is, we found a movie that most people didn't know. A couple of people did cheat and go watch the movie, but he said I'd be hard pressed to find another one that would work, that many people would just not know.
Right. Well, we need to have a big viewing party, a premiere, maybe at the next Movies by Minute gathering.
Yeah, that would be cool. That would be really cool. All right. Well, we're not here to we actually are not here to talk about Dave Made a Maze. We're here to talk about Blazing Saddles. And so let's remind everybody where we are here today on this Wednesday edition of this season 2. And we're going to start off with kind kind of wrapping up around the words pretty gritty, and we're going to end with have a drink. Chris, I think before we even started, you and I were chatting before we even were recording. To me, this may be the most genuine, non-comedic moment of the entire movie.
Yes. And not only that, first of all, when you announced this project, I believe I messaged you within 60 seconds and said, please give me the Gene Wilder, the Waco Kid monologue from, about 30 some minutes into the film. I must have this. This is my favorite monologue in any media, and that includes Shakespeare. If I were an actor, an aspiring actor, which I'm not, but if I were, I would memorize this and use it at auditions. I love this so much.
That's amazing you say that. I do come from both a stage and a film background. I've done a lot of acting, but I never knew I was going to move into that until later in my schooling. It wasn't until my freshman year in college that I actually stumbled into what acting was in terms of like on the stage and then in front of camera. But looking back, I realize a performance like this is something I always watched for how those lines were delivered and realized you don't have to race through your lines. That in fact, the pauses sometimes make a more effective point than a shout or a yell.
And especially when there's such a great punchline coming up.
Right.
And we'll get to that in a minute. I don't want to ruin it. But yeah, the pauses and the way that he looks off into the far distance, while recounting this experience, it sells it. It draws you in.
Yeah. And some of his motions, like he would unconsciously scratch his jaw. He would stick his tongue out. He would sit forward.
And his eyes are a little moist too.
Yeah, they're a little glassy. I don't know that he's crying so much or it's just the lighting, but it's so well shot. It's so well acted. The camera pretty much stays locked in position. It's a soft enough focus that he's able to kind of rock back and pull into the camera. I don't know if they're racking the focus to kind of keep it there, but he never really goes out of focus, but he does move around a little. But the camera never moves side to side during this whole storytelling.
Nope, not at all. It's right on him the whole time.
All right. For folks that are wondering the lines, just in case that they may not be as familiar as you and I, Chris, are with the movie, and we could probably rewrite the script. If we ever were in that post-apocalyptic world where they said, we've lost all of the media of the known the world, we need people to come forward and rewrite the scripts of the movies, I'd say, okay, sign me up for Blazing Saddles. I could do that. The lines, according to the script, we already talked about some of the changes yesterday. The rest of the script is pretty much dead on. It starts off with, it got pretty gritty. I'd hear the word draw in my sleep.
And one day, I was just walking down the street, and I heard a voice behind me say, "Reach for it, mister." I spun around, and there I was, face to face with a 6-year-old kid. Well, I just threw my guns down and walked away. Little bastard shot me in the ass. So I limped to the nearest saloon, crawled inside a whiskey bottle, and I've been there ever since.
I'd like to read something to you. I was researching what specific trope this speech embodies because it's so familiar to me from other TV shows and movies, right? There's the only thing I could think of, and I can't think of the specific example, but I remember watching something where a cop was talking about, like, he was the best cop in his precinct, and then he accidentally shot a kid or something like that, and he had to retire. and that's why, drinks a lot. So I'm going to read to you this. This is courtesy of tvtropes.org, and I found this was a monologue included under the page for retired gunfighter trope. And this is actually from a Twilight Zone episode from 1959 called Mr. Denton on Doomsday. I'm not familiar with that episode. Here it goes. So this is the monologue here. I was good.
I was real good. I was so good that once a day, someone would ride into town to make me prove it. And every morning, I'd start my drinking a few minutes earlier. Until one morning, the guy who asked me to prove it turned out to be 16 years old. I left him there on his face, right there in front of the saloon. I left him there bleeding to death with my bullet in him. I guess it'll start all over again now. Every fast and fancy man who owns a gun will come riding in down that street. Only this time it'll be me face down, bleeding to death.
That is so close to the Waco Kid speech, the monologue. It's the same story of he was the best gunfighter. People would ride into town just to challenge him, and then and it's taking his toll on him because, of course, every time he's doing this, he could get killed himself. So he's drinking more. And then some 16-year-old kid, not 6, it's a little absurd, but a 16-year-old shows up. And in this version, he guns him down, but this is what causes him to retire, right? It's the same basic character, except this is the serious version that then in Blazing Saddles, they're having fun with at the very end. And I think this serious version, this is the one we have in our heads as he starts the monologue. We expect it to go in that direction because it is such a trope. And I love that then they play with it at the very end.
So this episode you're talking about, and I'm so glad you brought it up because I was a big fan of Twilight Zone. I started introducing my oldest daughter to some of them. I said, don't look for it for really wild special effects. Don't watch these for any kind of crazy camera moves. Watch it for storytelling, specifically the kind of twist endings that were so emblematic of what the Twilight Zone did week after week. And this show was actually part of what looks like season 1. It was the 3rd overall episode. It actually had guest appearances by Martin Landau, Dan Duria, Gene Cooper, Malcolm Atterbury, Doug McClure, Ken Lynch, Arthur Batanitis, Bill Irwin, and Robert Burton. And here is the plot. And I love this twist. You've kind of explained through that monologue. Al Denton was once known as the quickest draw in town, but riddled with increasing guilt over the losers in his gun duels, one of whom was a teenage boy. So he becomes an alcoholic wreck and the laughingstock of the community. A mysterious salesman shows up and tries to inexplicably regain his shooting expertise back again. And so apparently decides to sell him a potion to get him back, give him the confidence he needs to get back into it because he needs to challenge somebody. And at this appointed time, he's being challenged by a man named Pete Grant, a brash young gunfighter. Well, Denton downs his potion only to find that his opponent has done the exact same thing, having been sold the same potion.
Oh.
Grant and Denton both realize they've been tricked by fate, but it's too late to back out of the duel. Each man shoots the other in the hand, causing injuries that are technically minor, but will forever ruin their ability to pull a trigger. Denton tells his young opponent that they have both been blessed because they will never again be able to fire a gun in anger. He adds to himself that Grant is lucky because he was given this lesson early in life. Henry J. Fate tips his hat to Denton and rides quietly out of town.
Nice.
Very cool. I'm going to have to go back and pull that episode and watch that. That is really neat.
Yeah, and I think even when they did that episode, that's drawing on stories in westerns and heck, even like Marty Robbins songs, you know, about gunfighters that eventually it catches that toll catches up to them, constantly being faced with their own mortality and having to kill somebody else. Yeah, constantly dueling cannot be healthy for you in any way.
No. And especially when he says that line, which it's a great single line. I started to hear the word draw in my sleep.
Right, right.
And you realize, even though, and you know what? I don't know. I know Mel Brooks had an issue with how young Gene Wilder technically was, but there was something about his look. He doesn't look like a young man in this. Maybe it's because of the 5 o'clock shadow. Maybe it's because, his eyes are a little glassy and his hair is unkempt. But when he dives into this story, you get the sense that, maybe he is only 40, but life and this path of death always in front of him has just weakened him and wearied him, and he's just ready for it all to end.
Yeah, I mean, even if he's only survived 20 years of this lifestyle, that's about 19 more years than most people.
Can you imagine that? Being challenged by everybody and realize it's truly life or death. You don't want to draw. It's not like people, based on the story he's telling, it's not like they were bad guys, or he, was stopping a bank robbery, or he was trying to regain somebody's land. People were coming to test how fast the Waco Kid was, and he knew, if I don't kill them, they're going to kill me.
Right, and it's purely sport at that point. It's not over. There aren't any extrinsic, I guess that's the right word, stakes. It's purely just, we're just going to keep challenging you at an existential level to see,
right,
if you still got it.
And let me ask you this, because I'm going to tie it back around to your podcast for a moment and see if there's a similarity or not, about just the idea that you are backed into a corner and the only way you can keep surviving is through the death of others. Hal has his own sort of being backed in the corner in the late minutes of 2001.
Yes. We have this debate going on the show whether Hal is backed into a corner because of a mistake that he made. Was it glitchy? And he made a mistake, and now he has to cover because he doesn't want them to shut him down because he's making mistakes. Or is he a murderer? Just he planned ahead of time that I am the most important part of this ship, and therefore the humans have to go, and I've been planning this like a chess game through the whole voyage and just trying to find where they are the most vulnerable and then taking them out one by one. I think there's evidence for both of those arguments. I think I would argue that, like, it seems like what I call the Kubrick version of the story is more this like calculating murderer. Whereas the Arthur C. Clarke, I've been reading the novel at the same time, or rereading it, and it seems more sympathetic, and that Hal is sincerely glitching because of some conflicting programming regarding keeping something secret and still being a perfect information processing device.
See, that's what I remember. And when I've seen the movie, and I've seen it dozens of times, is I always thought you built a perfect computer and then you told it to do something that went against its programming, and then it causes it to kind of, it's almost in a more Kubrick version, which is much higher and more artsy, of what was in the Star Trek episode when they convinced the robot that Harry Mudd always lies. Right. And then Harry Mudd goes, yes, listen to me, I'm lying. He's like, well, wait a minute. If you're lying, then you're telling me the truth. But if you're always lying, then you can't be telling me the truth. But you just told me you're lying, and that is the truth. So you can't always be, and it just shuts him down.
Right.
And it makes me feel like it's that same kind of circuitous glitch that is happening with Hal.
Yeah, either one of those explanations, I think, can be used. when watching the film.
It is scarier to think that the machine is a murderous planning bastard who wants to slowly kill everybody as far away from home as possible.
Right. And I don't have like hard evidence on paper for that. It's more like when you watch these things minute by minute, you start to pick up on certain tone and you want to read into that certain intent.
Yeah.
That's what happened there. I think I'm the one who's advocating that one beyond more than my co-host.
You know what, though? I tell my girls this all the time. I was teaching them about writing, and now they're, as I mentioned earlier, that they're getting ready to graduate from college here pretty soon, that a very well done story will leave it just open enough that you can argue effectively and equally two sides of an opposite side of an argument. And I always use Hamlet as an example. You can argue very effectively that Hamlet is faking his madness and just gets pulled in too deep with his own pretending. And you can argue, no, he actually does go mad. They both work. It's just how you want to interpret it.
Right. It's the ambiguousness of, and not ambiguous in terms of that the writing isn't there or isn't, or, you know, that there's something missing. It's more just at the end of the day, you cannot get inside a character's head.
And this one may be one of our shorter minutes, which I'll clip this line saying that, which is fine because it is unfortunate. There's not a whole lot to dive into. I think the thing I wanted to get more than anything is, even though this is a comedy, and even though this is sort of the satirical parody of the Old West, and there's a deeper, bigger story happening here, when we get this nice moment like this with Gene Wilder, it really anchors me, anyway, as a viewer, that there is a story worth watching. It isn't just a fluff movie, that there's a lot happening here, and it really invests me into the relationship of Bart and Jim.
Oh, absolutely. And it creates a pair that we're now rooting for. If it was just the Waco Kid was is the fastest shot in the West, and that's it. Okay, he found a good, Bart found a good ally. They'll maybe trade some witty jokes here and there, blah blah blah. But that pathos in the character, that pain, and realizing that it gives them a humanity, and then it allows the two of them to be sympathetic heroes of this film, more than a lot of Westerns do. A lot of Westerns will just be like, they'll have a character that's the protagonist, and I'm talking pre-anti-hero Westerns, because then it goes really off the rails about character motivations and how much we sympathize with them, or in what ways do we sympathize. But in the old-fashioned Westerns, it was someone who rode into town and had a sense of duty towards the good folk of the town or the ranch. This is more like these two characters have found themselves in this predicament. And in a way, that's more relatable. A lot of times we don't get to choose when we are the protagonists, where we're the protagonists. More like, okay, here I am in this situation that I found myself in, and I have someone I can relate to that's going to help me. Perfect. Yeah, and that's the best of all circumstances. So, this scene really lets that gel.
Yeah, I think the way I would encapsulate it, and I agree with everything you've just said, we could have had two very stock, typical hero-like characters. We've already been introduced to Bart as the sort of the trickster trope, or the trickster archetype. He's always managing to wriggle himself out of situations. He's cleverer than the people around him, and he's likable because of that. But there's a third dimension to him. There is that sense of being genuine and kind, and he's not willing to give up on people around him. And here's now the gunslinger, who could be, once again, a two-dimensional stock character. He's just the gunslinger. But with this story, we get a depth and a humanity to him, and he becomes something bigger and more than just, the partner. He now has his own backstory that we sympathize with, and we understand why he wants to drink himself. And I said that yesterday, so we're going to learn a little bit more about why he wants to, quote unquote, crawl into a bottle. And we can now, and it's not something stupid. It's not, I'm just not good at work, or I just feel like I'm never going to make as much as everybody. It's a true, like, I can see myself going, yeah, I understand why you would choose to just sort of mute those thoughts, those memories. You're just trying to close out those thoughts in your head and just those memories. And it makes sense.
Yeah. And his life at this point does not really have a purpose. And now the events of the rest of the film are going to give him that purpose. And that's all that matters. That's why we're rooting for him.
Yeah. In fact, what we're going to see here is from the forging of this alliance, and we still have a few more minutes that we're going to be going of these two chatting and reminiscing. We're going to see Bart continue to become the hero. And not like we don't already know that, but he is literally going to become the savior of the town. And then Jim now has a new role. Rather than using my gunslinging for stopping just anybody randomly, I have a purpose. Stop the bad guys. I now actually do have bad people, and I can help the sheriff achieve his objective. And now if we weren't already, we're definitely rooting for these two to win. And
the fact that they're fighting on behalf of people who don't like them adds an extra element.
Yeah, and that I think is part of that bigger, deeper story that and you're right. This isn't the best Gene Wilder movie in the sense of like there's other movies where he does a better performance, but in terms of the message that you walk away with, it's my favorite Gene Wilder movie because there's that bigger, deeper story happening where we break down the stupidity of judging people by color or by ethnicity or by sex or where they were born or where they came from. And we look at people for their stories, who they really are. And I love that message.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's about all I got to say about that. All right. Well, Chris, I know this is a little shorter, and with our co-host gone, we were able to get really to the meat of the message without diving all over the place. So we really see who takes us on those rabbit trails week after week. But in your notes for this minute 38, did you have anything that we missed?
I have a few things. Well, they're not what we missed, but just things that I've latched onto in that monologue, and it's specifically, well, one. What if this were accompanied by flashback footage? So you see him while he's giving the narration, shooting, having these duels in the, on the main drag of the town, and then being confronted by, rather, the little kid. Is that a missed opportunity to get in a visual gag, or do you like the way he just delivers?
I like that they choose to stick it in a storytelling mode and let it play out in our heads as we're watching him recount and bring up these memories. I think if we had gone the montage route or even the visual route, I think it would have been almost too visceral seeing him, like, especially if they like shoot a guy, fall, shoot a guy, fall, shoot a guy, fall, shoot a guy, fall, then show the kid. I think it takes it away from, it almost makes it less comedic in terms of the overall movie, because we're like, oh, that movie was so funny, except for that one scene where they kept showing him shoot all these people. And I think him just telling the story allows us to empathize with his character without giving us reasons to maybe not empathize because of what we might be shown visually.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you would think this would be an opportunity for Mel Brooks to do some visual gags somehow. In having this recurring these recurring duels on the main street there at high noon.
Let me ask you, taking into account what you said kind of yesterday and what we talked about the later films of Mel Brooks, are you saying that because of you now know pretty much the whole body of work of Mel Brooks versus the Mel Brooks of 1973.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like everything became more and more visual gags later on.
Right. I think if this movie had been shot, like let's say Mel Brooks had this idea for this cowboy movie, but he chose to shoot it in the late 80s, you would have had that. You would have had a lot more of those cutaways. You would have had a lot more visual gags. And I think that would have weakened the overall effect of the movie. I think because of him being still a younger filmmaker and still trying to, work on what was happening in the subtext rather than trying to just hit us over the head nonstop with visual gags, I think in some ways that's why this movie is so strong still to this day.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah, and then the other thing that I just latch onto, and why this is my favorite monologue, like I said, of any media, the punchline. Little bastard shot me in the ass. And are we allowed to swear on the podcast?
Yes.
Okay.
I bleep creatively.
So all of the story leading up to this is following that retired gunfighter full of regret, wistful. I don't know if that's the right word, but definitely they're full of regret and so much pathos and sadness leading up to the punchline. Little bastard shot me in the ass. And the way he delivers it, it completely shifts the tone of the line itself has a completely different tone than everything else that came before it. And it's relating the physical pain of being shot in the rear end and annoyance. And I just love that. It's a line that I will actually, my wife and I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and there are parts of town that kind of look like the Old West. If I see a little boy in a cowboy hat, all I have to say to my wife is, and I'll say it under my breath so the kid doesn't hear me, but I'll say, little bastard shot me in the ass. And we lose it. We will be laughing for 20 minutes. But that line, just as the punchline to the monologue, is so well written, so well delivered. It's so perfect. And that's why I rushed to sign up for this minute. It was just to cover that.
Well, I'm glad we were able to accommodate you, and I really have to say, hearing your analysis and thoughts, it's been our pleasure to have you, because this was a great conversation about probably the single most poignant and realistic part of the entire film. And it's fantastic, and it happens just when we need it. We needed to know why to root for Jim as well as Bart, and this does it for me. And I like how here's Sheriff Bart the whole time that we've seen the Waco Kid drink. He's really concerned about him drinking, but even he, after he hears this monologue, his last line of the minute as it closes out is, "Have a drink."
Right.
Like he realizes, oh God, now I know why. Here, you need a drink.
And telling that story, brought up a lot of trauma. So, even as bad as drinking is for you, at the level that he's been drinking, go ahead and have a drink.
Yeah. And once again, it's continuing to forge this buddy relationship that now it's no longer I'm interviewing you and I'm just talking. It's now I get it. Let me go ahead and give you a bottle.
Right. I know what makes you tick. And, we're going to, and you have a sort of wisdom of this Wild West environment. And now I definitely need you as an ally.
All right, so we're going to wrap this minute up. We're in the middle of the week here. We still have 2 more days left. I can tell you, I'm going to tease you audience members that might know some of these names if you're familiar with other podcasters, but we've got Sean German and Dave Pallas on at the same time. So who knows how long that episode's going to last. But before we set the stage for that episode tomorrow, Chris, you have been our guest for the last couple of days. it's now my chance to open the podcast door, and let you talk about your show.
Well played. So our podcast is called Open the Podcast Doors, Hal. And you can find that on iTunes and Google Play and I think even Spotify, all those major podcatchers, as they call them. And we also have an Instagram account that's sort of a companion to it. I update that pretty much every day. And then usually for the episodes that are airing, I'll have a key image for that episode or more. And that's at Open the Podcast Doors, Hal on Instagram. And then we have a listener society called Space Station 5. It's on Facebook.
Fantastic. I'm going to do a kind of a different closing plug here. I want everyone to just take a second and realize if you're a podcast listener, whether you listen to all of these movies by minutes, just a handful, or whatever podcast you happen to listen to, if you haven't already, take a second, go to your podcatcher of choice, find the episode or find the show, and just leave a rating and a comment. Take a second. It really helps find the way the metrics work or the way the algorithms work on a lot of these podcatchers is it's not just the rating, it's the comment that adds a little more weight. And so if you then go to, let's say, Apple Podcasts and search for, hey, are there any podcasts about the movie 2001? Are there any podcasts about Gene Wilder? Well, those ratings and those comments actually will help elevate that search and hopefully take the newbie who's just joining the world of podcasts or maybe looking for a new show to help find our shows. So it really helps us out, and it doesn't cost you a dime, doesn't take but a few minutes to just go to the comments, go there, give us a rating, leave a comment, and I would appreciate it. And I'm sure, Chris, you feel the same way.
Howard Johnson is right. I've been waiting 2 episodes to have the opportunity to give you a Howard Johnson is right.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad I was able to tee it up for you. Well, folks, I want you to come back tomorrow, Thursday, because we're going to come back and continue this scene because our last words were have a drink. So we're going to hear the Waco Kid say thanks. And when we end the minute tomorrow, we're going to be on when suddenly from out of the... And you're going to have to come back tomorrow to find out what's happening on this, the Wilder Ride. So I limped to the nearest saloon, crawled inside a bottle, and that's why I drink every time I podcast.
I couldn't have timed that better. Oh my god.
I drink because Daddy podcasts. All right.